into the Naval Academy, there were things as simple as my hair. I had longer hair at the time, and I did things like just do regular cornrows, and I was definitely met with a lot of difficulties after doing that. But to me, it was neat. It was pulled back out of my face, but there were no regulations regarding that. But that's something that my white male counterparts and even white female counterparts didn't have to deal with something as simple as just getting heckled about my hair every day. And then moving forward into flight school, met some barriers there, just things as the lack of representation that was there. I was one of 5 Black students, and by the time we had gotten done, attrition is normal, but by the time we had finished flight school, I think there was 2 of us left. So there's that. And then in Oklahoma, I spent my entire 4 years being the only Black female flyer out of the entire Navy on base, and I think I saw one other Black woman wearing a flight suit my final year there, and she was Air Force. But during that time, it was 2015 through 2018, there was a lot of sparks and social injustice during that time as well with regards to women. The first Women's March happened. There was Colin Kaepernick kneeling and Black Lives Matter movement sparking up, and also LGBTQ, the community. A lot of movements were happening there, and I was the only one that a lot of my enlisted sailors and also fellow officers would turn to for questions, or people wanted to debate with me about things, but that was something extra on my plate that no one else had to deal with. So while getting a mission commander qualification, I was also getting stopped in the middle of my day asking, well, what do you think about this, or what do you think about, the election and Trump and Black Lives Matter movement and things like that? I was the only one that people could turn to for that. So those are things that maybe people don't see as barriers, but it definitely loaded up my plate a lot more than it needed to be, and a lot more than my counterparts, white male counterparts, white female counterparts, had to deal with, for sure. So those are my thoughts, just thinking about the barriers that are there for minorities and people of color. Thank you.
Apologize, I was muted. What are you hoping to see with all of those things that you just mentioned? What are you hoping to see from this task force?
I think that a lot of education and acknowledgement could easily happen just from the conversations that I would have, especially in Oklahoma. People just didn't know things. They didn't know about the history of minorities in the Navy and the military. And they do know that we celebrate the first, but we don't talk about the struggles that they had during those times. So I think education could absolutely go a long way. I remember taking naval history at the Naval Academy, but I didn't hear anything about minorities in the military and in naval history or anything like that. So we could definitely start with education and acknowledgement, for sure.
Admiral,
any
response?
I'm sorry. I just want to say thank you, Lieutenant Henderson, for your comments. Definitely worth noting and thinking about. And again, as a person who's been in the Navy now for 32 years, I can echo some of your concerns and things I've seen. So thank you very much. Let's continue.
Yes, sir. This is Senior Chief Carrillo. I'm on the line. I've been trying to get the Zoom thing to work, but I'm dialed in. Is that okay, or do I need to go through other avenues here?
No, you're good. If you're dialed in, you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. I just have to agree with ma'am there. You said Lieutenant Commander, correct, ma'am?
It's a lieutenant.
Okay, yeah. So with the lieutenant there, I agree with her about the education piece. We definitely need to educate ourselves beyond the color of our skin. I wrote a problem essay and I sent it up to Force there, and he has it there. And it is my opinion that in order for us to really adapt inclusion and diversity. I'm sorry, what?
No, nobody said anything. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So we must we must not just focus on one specific demographics. If we're really going to be inclusive and diversity for all, then I think the topic should be that, right? So for example, when we talk about suicide, and this is where the education piece comes in my opinion. So when we first rolled out, let's say, suicide prevention, right, and suicide, those programs, we've educated everybody on, hey, how do we get to this point? Why do some of our sailors decide to take their lives? And we go into those things. So we educate our sailors. So then in turn, they're more informed. But we don't focus on the demographics behind it, right? We don't focus that most white sailors with a gun are higher likely to kill themselves, right? So, and we focus on everybody and how that affects everybody. And similar to what we've been doing here the past few weeks, we've been focusing on one specific demographic, but then we're kind of shutting down. And it's not intentional. It's just our focus is on one demographic and on one racial group, but in turn that kind of quiets the other racial groups from kind of speaking up. For example, the video that the CNO sent out on June 20 last month, right? So he talked about the Navy must seize the opportunity to engage in conversations about race relations, inclusions within our force. Now is the time to have open and honest conversations across the Navy, and I agree with that. But then he focuses on like, oh, here's some examples of some of our sailors. And that video was very one directional with one narrative. And not everybody agreed with that video. To me, including myself, especially when HM3, approximately 7 minutes into the video, talks about the superficial programs that the Navy has, it leaves minorities underappreciated and undervalued. And I was like, why would he say that on my behalf? I don't feel underappreciated. I don't feel undervalued. I'm not saying that all sailors are like that, and not all sailors feel undervalued and all that stuff. And then he finished it by, we will stand on the rights of time when we realize that all Black Lives Matter. That was very one narrative. In turn, again, honest, awesome intent, and it was great. But then that kind of shuts down the rest of the racial groups, right? It just spotlights on one racial group. I guess the other example I can give is when we first rolled out sexual harassment. Remember, sexual harassment was a good topic, and it was a thing to bring up because it was happening, right? But sexual harassment, when we rolled out sexual harassment policies, is we focused on women and women only, and I think we missed the mark on there, right? When we first did that, I'm not saying now. When we first rolled it out, we focused on women and women only, but then that kind of shut down our male sailors. So, in other words, was that not happening to me? Now that kind of shut down innocently. It shut down the male sailors in our Navy. Because we just focused on that one. And it's like, hey, I'm a male. This is happening to me. So it kind of shut them down. And then also when we rolled out that program, it was we focused on the victim, right? The victim and hey, well, the way you're dressed and all this and all that stuff. So now we educated ourselves beyond that, right? So my recommendation for racism and inclusion and diversity, just like the lieutenant said, we must educate ourselves beyond our color of our skin. To me, sailors are sailors. As a senior chief, I'm a sailor. And then what needs to happen is we can't let this organization that we work for, we can't let it be political. It needs to be apolitical. That's how we remain the respectable force that we are. We remain apolitical, and then we educate our sailors beyond their color of their skin. Sailor's a sailor. And if we can, so we're supposed to be a beacon of hope during these times. We're supposed to lead our society and be an example for our society, not society be the other way around for us. You know, like me and Forrest talked about on Friday, it's like, if we just enforce our instructions, we wouldn't be having these conversations, because our instructions our instructions are written to where it includes everybody, and we select the people that are the best and fully qualified. And I love our programs, and the Navy saved my life. I have a background, you know, I grew up in Los Angeles, and I can, if you guys want to hear that out, but I don't want to take away from more time from other people that want to talk. But
all right, thanks, Senior. We appreciate you sharing.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and open it up to who else has got something to say. I think Lieutenant Commander Machado is unmuting already.
How's it going, everyone? Admiral, thank you very much for being here and supporting an effort like this. I'm Lieutenant Commander Rolando Machado. I'm the Navy Service Rep for the Association of Naval Service Officers. I graduated from the United States Naval Academy in 2009. Like Lieutenant Henderson, one thing that I realized very quickly was I feel like a fish out of water when I got there. I was one of 2 Hispanics among my plebe class. So we had 40 in my company plebe class. And it was me and Dan Rocha. And he was from Texas and I was from Miami, Florida. Both of us had grown up in environments where we were the majority, and we immediately came into an environment where we were not. And so my blue and gold officer prepared me for plebe summer and how to think about the physical stressors, the mental stressors. But the one thing they couldn't prepare me for was the fact that I had succeeded very, very well in an environment where my cultural identity played a role in how I expressed myself. And going to the Naval Academy, I realized I couldn't quite be as passionate or excited or loud as I was in Miami, because that was perceived differently. It was perceived negatively. And so that's something that was the very beginning of kind of a process within myself of figuring out my own leadership style. And I commissioned as an officer, and I'll just talk about a couple of the moments in my life where, as a naval officer, I've been impacted. I was sitting in the log room of a warship. I was not on watch. We were on deployment, and 2 sailors were behind me, and they started speaking in Spanish. And for the first time in a long time, I felt very comfortable. So I turned around and I started having a conversation with them in Spanish. Just seeing how things were going on back home. We're 3-4 months into deployment. Well, sure enough, a chief petty officer from another department kind of popped their head in the log room, heard me speak in Spanish, and stood me up and basically berated me in front of 2 junior sailors for speaking Spanish. Essentially implying that I'm un-American, unpatriotic, etc. Right? That person left. I felt very embarrassed, ashamed, and at the time I didn't know what the right thing to do was. I thought I was wrong. Come to find out that it's perfectly fine to speak a foreign language in our Navy, as long as you're not on watch and you're not executing or giving a direct order. But I didn't learn that till way later. That was a big marking moment for me, because it said very clearly to me that you diminish your ability to lead when you express yourself too much. I went on to my second ship, and I had a sailor who was leaving the Navy. She was a single sailor, a single mother. She had chosen to leave the Navy. She was from Southern California, last name Gonzalez. And she, the day that she checked out with me, I had a conversation with her, and I asked her, why is it you're leaving the Navy? And she said essentially, well, you're the first Hispanic officer I've met in the Navy, and you're not even Hispanic. She said, I didn't like reggaeton. I didn't listen to salsa. I didn't speak Spanish, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are untrue. I taught salsa at the Naval Academy for all you Naval Academy folks there. I was part of that crew. But I had realized in that moment that I had to shun who I was in order to lead in our Navy. And that was another marking moment for me, because it told me, hey, the exact opposite is true. I cannot change who I am to lead. I have to figure out how I lead using my style, but within this service. That's a long time, 3 years in the Navy to start figuring that out. I'm already behind the power curve. And so when we talk about what we want out of Task Force 1 Navy, I think one of the things we want is we want to be able to talk openly and honestly about these things early in our sailors' careers, so that they understand that their 18 years of growing up cannot be turned around in 3 months and immediately change the way they approach a problem. Our culture within the Navy is a Navy culture, and the assimilation does have to occur to Navy culture, and accordingly, Navy culture needs to acclimatize itself to our diversity. You know, we talk about diversity and inclusion, and lately we've been talking a lot more about inclusion, about how your voice needs to be heard among a group of people. But what I think is very important and very telling is that you cannot have a voice to be heard if you don't have a seat at the table. So the last 4-star admiral that self-identified as Hispanic was Admiral Horacio Rivero, and he retired from the Navy in 1972. And this is also a kind of a subtle message, right? If you ask what ships are named after naval leaders that are of Hispanic descent, you know, you'll think of Gonzalez, right? You'll think of Farragut, right? And I think there's maybe one more, but you look at Gonzalez, you look at the, I think there's 2, but they're Medal of Honor winners. Oh, it was Baldomero Lopez, First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez. Those are 2 Medal of Honor winners. Great reason to name a ship after them, right? And then you look at some of the other names, and there's all these 4-star admirals, people who served, right? But you don't see a career officer who has a name, a namesake after them, right? So Admiral Rivero is the most recent 4-star that the Hispanic community has in the Navy, and yet there's no recognition of him. He's an asterisk. Yet he was a vice chief of naval operations during Vietnam. President Kennedy assigned him to be the amphibious, the backup amphibious assault force during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Hey, Commander, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in just because we are limited on time. We've used up our first 25 minutes, and so I want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to discuss. But I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate those words. I also
before I get off, I do want to make a couple of quick things. So actionable items, things that we could definitely kind of move forward on. There are 17 historically Black colleges or universities that have NROTC units. Their Navy only recognizes 3 high Hispanic enrollment NROTC units. That said, there are 4, from my count, doing research that should be recognized as high Hispanic enrollment institutions that already have an NROTC unit. Quick win would be immediately to kind of recognize those and allow the minority scholarship to be offered them. The other thing too that we need to do is we need to incentivize recruiters. We need to incentivize recruiters to recruit diversity officer applicants for NROTC and do that above and beyond enlisted contracts. We talk a lot about diversity with enlisted contracts, but we don't allow those high school recruiters to go in and find those NROTC diversity officers that are fantastic. So those are a couple quick things, and I have plenty more and I can talk more, but I got you, sir. Let me I'll take a step back, and I'm open for anything you guys need.
Okay, so yeah, just let's be mindful of other people's getting them the opportunity to speak. I also do want to point out one other thing, and Commander, not a big deal, but let's also be mindful of not dropping other people's names. You can talk about the experiences that you've had throughout your career and the experiences that you've seen, but we'd appreciate it just for privacy concerns of not dropping other individuals' names who are not here to speak on their own behalf. So with that, let's go ahead and toss it out to anybody else who's got something that they would like to discuss. And I believe Chief Warrant Officer Williams has just raised her hand.
Good morning. My name is Chief Warrant Officer Williams. I am 7111. I'm a ship's bosun. So I am the minority, I guess, on two fronts, as in a female bosun mate by trade, and also I am one of only two Black female bosuns in the Navy as of right now. So just speaking to Lieutenant Henderson, I can relate on a lot of her points, just being that as a Black female in my recent years after my commission, so which is as recent as 2016, I reported to a ship. I had a assistant first lieutenant, and he would not speak to me. He would not acknowledge that I was in the room, or that I had the expertise to speak on a topic that he had a question on. He would speak around me even to my chief. And when I addressed him on it, he assured me that it was not because I was a female, because I saw that he had no issues with interacting with other female officers. So my question to him is that I'm a Black female, and that he felt that I didn't possess the knowledge or the skill set to speak on a job that I had been doing for the last 22 years. So I have noticed that, and it astonished me that late in my career to be experiencing racism or sexism at that point. But earlier in my career, I experienced actually being called the N-word on the boat deck of a warship, a Navy warship. And when I went to speak and bring it to my chief's attention, it was downplayed. It was made like, he didn't mean to say that, or I'm sure that's not what he was implying. He didn't need to imply it. He actually said the word, and I heard the word, and it was in reference to me telling him to simply go complete a task, as I was an E5 and he was a seaman. So I'm definitely feeling it, and I understand where Senior Chief is saying, where we don't want to exclude any other race by talking about the racism as it affects towards African American people. But if we're having this much trouble acknowledging and dealing with and addressing with the racism that is towards a very large demographic in the Navy, then all the other demographics that are experiencing any type of racism, then imagine how much trouble or how much resistance they're going to feel once they make their issues known. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen other races come out with being racially discriminated and come out with stories and things like that. Nobody that I've seen in my experience has felt that their voice has been quieted by the events that's going on. And I think that it is important to acknowledge it. It's important to acknowledge that in 2015 was the first time that the Navy got a Black female deck warrant officer. So that was just, that just blew my mind. At 2015, so late, so near in the, our future that we have, or our past that we have we're still encountering first for different races and also for genders. So I get it on that's just my spiel on racism that I faced in the Navy. But sexism, as a female bosun mate, I had to work very hard to get out of the deck office and get out of administrative duty and actually find another bosun mate that wanted to show me how to be a bosun mate. I wasn't trying to shy away from work, but they assumed that because I was a female that I would automatically try to get out of doing the hard work and also try to get into running papers and doing paperwork. But that was not the case. So most females that I encounter that have an issue with sexism, it's because they already coming into a preconceived role as, okay, they're just trying to get out of work. Okay, they're just trying to take the easy way out. So, and that was a big uphill battle for me to try to get out of that mindset of being more than a maintenance person and more than an admin person. So, and that was in 2002 that I experienced that.
All right. Well, let me begin by saying thank you very much for the words that you just passed along, but also thank you very much for your service and what you are doing. It's truly, truly appreciated. Let's go to YN1 Leaks. Great to see you again, as well as YN2 Mahoney. Why don't we hear from some enlisted perspective here?
Good morning, sir. Admiral, good morning. NC1 Leaks, thank you for having this discussion. Force, thank you for the invite. One thing I did want to say, or feedback I did want to give, is I think to train the force on inclusion, whether it's sex, religion, race, whatever, we first have to teach empathy. A lot of sailors, a lot of things that I'm seeing now is because people can't picture themselves in the shoes of an African American or a Hispanic or someone from the LGBT community. I think if the Navy focuses on teaching empathy so that sailors can learn or get a sense of how other sailors feel in their shoes, or in a sense walk in the shoes of one of those. If we do teach empathy, then I think all of the, I won't say it will cease, but I think we'll see a decline in racial matters or sexism or whatever it is.
YN2?
YN1, thank you. And also Admiral and Force Master Chief, thank you for hosting this session. So I agree, just kind of want to build off what YN1 said, and I'll kind of give a short story of, you know, how I've experienced discrimination and bias. So I'm part of the LGBT community, and I was a departmental yeoman on the carrier, and I had a first class that he was what we would refer to as old school or redneck, you know, didn't grew up, you know, not in a very cultured area or dense demographic areas, but I was the most junior person, and he would make passive aggressive comments. Like, he'd ask people about his weekends and he wouldn't want to hear about mine, or he'd make sly comments, you know, about, you know, just like me not being straight. And I wasn't also afforded opportunities, and he would verbally berate me in front of my LCPO and my commander, and eventually, you know, my commander just got sick of it, and she ended up putting him at attention, and my senior chief as well, because he wouldn't do anything. He would just endorse it. But, you know, that's besides the point. And to build on what YN1 was saying, right, we need to teach people in enlisted ranks. I wouldn't even just say that, all sessions within the military, the ability to be more empathetic and to utilize the programs that are out there. You know, because it's not just about one person being hurt or another, it's about overall bias and opportunity being granted to people from all areas of the spectrum, you know, race, sexism, age, lifestyle, whatever. You know, having to create that empathy in the most objective way is the ultimate goal. And one of the things I'd like to recommend that I think would be amazing would be to create, so like in the officer candidacy schools, they have etiquette courses. So civility creates courtesy, which will in turn develop professionalism and make empathy. It will become a reactionary effect. So just being able to be with people that are of a diverse spectrum and learning how to treat each other properly, even if it's in a formal setting, especially since the Navy is the most diplomatically involved branch of the military. This will enable, hosting events on cruisers, destroyers, carriers, and working with officers and event planning for host nations. And this, I just think it would be a good idea overall. And that's just my 2 cents.
I'm going to be biased in what I say here, but I've worked with YN2 Mahoney at CNP for the past 8-9 months. And since day one, I've been impressed with his maturity and his wisdom at his age. So well said, well said. Let's actually go over to Chief Stiles. I haven't heard from you yet.
Hi, sir. Thank you for the invitation. Force Master Chief, Admiral. Good afternoon. It's Senior Chief Stiles now, sir.
Oh, well, congratulations, Senior. I apologize for that.
No problem. So I think for me, I have a unique situation because people don't often recognize me as being Puerto Rican because I'm mixed Puerto Rican with white. And also I hear a lot of chatter because people don't often realize that I'm married to a Black man. Chatter changes after they recognize me being married to a Black man, which leads me to our sailors know. Our sailors know right from wrong. Our peers know. Our leadership know. Everybody knows right from wrong because as soon as they figure out that I am married to a Black man, they know to steer their conversation in a more appropriate way. Granted, sometimes it gets far enough that I have to correct them. I've corrected sailors using the N-word around me more than once. Not because, me being married to a Black man, but because it's wrong. So I correct them for that. And then they figure it out and whatnot. So what my 2 cents would be, and it sounds a little extreme, but if you just hear me out, is we have zero tolerance for drugs. Zero tolerance for sexual assault, zero tolerance for discrimination. When sailors willingly know the choices and the decisions that they're making, then the punishment should fit the crime, in my opinion. The other thing I would like to say is that people think often that they're complimenting me with my biracial children by saying, oh, in my family, we don't see color. Everybody's the same. We don't see color. And I think that as a leader, I think that's different. I take a different approach, and that I do see color. My Black sailors are going through something different right now than my white sailors are, or my Hispanic sailors are. Everybody's going through something different. So I don't think that it's fair for us to remove all of that from them. That's part of their pride. That's part of their upbringing. That's part of who they are. And so I think it's fair to acknowledge, just like my children are mixed and they acknowledge both parts of who they are. And it'd be unfair to say, well, because my children have a white mother, that my daughter is petrified to drive. She's learning to drive in the car with her father. She's petrified to get pulled over. She has a white mom, but she has a Black dad. And so we have to acknowledge diversity and, like I said, hold accountability because the sailors know better.
Okay. Senior, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's go over to Lieutenant Spivey, who actually just raised his hand.
Hey, thank you very much. Lieutenant John Rex Spivey, classmates with Lieutenant Henderson from the Naval Academy class of 2013, and very involved in the Alumni Association, and here representing the Naval Academy Minority Association group. First off, Admiral and Force Master Chief, thank you for bringing all of us into the discussion. And what I really want to thank you for is thank you for bringing in junior personnel into this discussion, because for the junior folks, this is our opportunity for our generation to kind of write our chapter of American history and how we can overcome things. So I really appreciate you allowing us to be a part of this solution. With that said, I really appreciate NC1 and YN2, your comments about empathy. And I think that this is a great opportunity for the Navy and quite frankly, our nation to reflect on our values. And I think the key is empathy itself, but in leadership. I'm very appreciative and grateful for what the U.S. Navy means to me. I'm from Northwest Arkansas, and what I've appreciated about the Navy is it has exposed me to a different world. I've traveled the world, and I've gotten to work with personnel from every part of this country, different different races, different religions, and it's really made me a better person. I think the empathy piece is we all have a story, and there's something in all of us that we can empathize with one another if we tell those stories. And so, people like Lieutenant Henderson have made an impact on my life by swapping stories. So I think to reiterate what you guys mentioned, I couldn't agree more. And I look forward to seeing what kind of leaders you become as you become chiefs, senior chiefs, or even become an officer, because I think you're right. I think we as a service and leadership need to say, how can we be more empathetic leaders to the sailors that we lead in our work centers, our ships, squadrons, and you name it. The other thing is I think it's an opportunity to learn. And for me personally, I have not had to walk in the shoes of many on this call. And I appreciate the stories that I've heard today and many other of my classmates and my peers and my sailors in my time in the Navy. And I think we must continue to learn from one another and to share those stories. And as we share those stories, I think we can identify barriers and look at ways to overcome those things. And I think the final thing and why I'm most enthusiastic about being a part of the Navy is, Lieutenant Henderson mentioned like the history of minorities in the service. And, do we have scars in our past? Absolutely. Have we made progress? We have. But we must not grow complacent in progress, but we must continue to progress and make a more inclusive and diverse Navy and celebrate that diversity. And this is not just a problem that's just to the Navy, but it's something that our entire nation's facing right now. And I think our Navy has the opportunity to step up, come together, and lead and be a model for our entire country. And so that's my ultimate goal, is having our United States Navy be the leaders of this issue for our country, and having our sailors, whenever they leave the Navy, go back to their communities and make that difference in this issue. So again, thank you, and looking forward to being a part of this solution.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Hey, we've got approximately 15 minutes left, and I want to be able to have an opportunity at the end for the Admiral and Force and Miss Roberts as well to have something to say. So what I would like to do, we'll go over to Lieutenant McMillan very briefly, and then I have a quick lightning round question I'd like to ask all of you. So Lieutenant McMillan, I'm going to give you about a minute, and Mr. Walker, I will give you about a minute.
Yes, sir. So Lieutenant McMillan here, graduated from Norfolk State in the year 2012. I'm a SWO IP. And what I wanted to comment on is, what would I like to see Task Force 1 Navy do? Lieutenant Commander mentioned it earlier, sir, and it's just really allowing everyone a seat at the table. Me, myself, I'm easily in those categories that are easily judged, such as being a woman, being an African-American, and also being a single mom. And so oftentimes those three things are counted against me. And instead of writing instructions, let's write those instructions and let's truly apply those instructions. We're asking for equal opportunity. We're asking for diversity and inclusion. In order to truly get there, we have to constantly have those, get comfortable having those uncomfortable conversations. And just recently in my own, I have had to have been fighting to get my qualification, my warfare qualification. And it took me to be able to address those unequal opportunities, even though others thought they were equal opportunities, in order for me to proudly wear my qualification. So I would just want us to continue to allow everyone to truly have that seat, instead of us having to revisit that each time we go to a command, sir. And that.
Okay, I think you got cut off there at the end, but over to Mr. Walker for a quick 1 minute.
Yes, sir. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Admiral, for the opportunity. Desmond Walker, surface nuke, 20 years Navy, graduated from Norfolk State University. My only point I want to get in is, after listening to a lot of the conversation, I want the task force to not lose sight of the leadership opportunity that the CNO gave us on June 3rd, where he acknowledged in an open forum that racism and discrimination exists in our Navy. To, I think, an earlier point that was made, I think that the conversation of racism and discrimination is not a political issue, but a human rights issue. And so if we look at it as a human rights issue and couple that with CNO's leadership, then our solutions won't be political to begin with. The solutions will be an example of Navy, in spite of our larger macro conversations going on in our country, Navy can lead in the change that needs to happen and let the Navy actually be a representation of this diverse country that we want it to be. So let's not lose sight on that. And I think that's important because of all the task force chartered issues, whether it's recruiting, detailing, fitness reports, military justice, you name it, whatever the issue is, especially when you look at something like the Navy Leadership Development Framework 3.0, where we talk about character and competence. Along that path, whether you are enlisted or officer, at no point does it talk about anything culturally related when it comes to developing our sailors and our officers. So our solutions must accept the fact of what CNO led with, which is it exists. And so now what is the Navy going to do within its left and right limits of creating a more diverse workforce and as part of one Navy team?
Okay, very good. All right, so this is going to be a very quick lightning round. You're only going to get about 10 to 15 seconds for your answer. I'm going to try to get through everybody on the list that is a participant in this, and then we will leave the remainder of our time to our leadership. Just so you know what the two questions are, the first question is going to be if you are going to solve a problem of racism or sexism or whatever you consider your top concern about what's going on in the Navy, how would you resolve that? What's the number one thing you would do to resolve that issue? And then we'll come back for a second lightning round. And what is your number one piece of advice to the task force? So first question will be, how do you resolve your biggest concern? Second question is going to be, what is your biggest piece of advice to the task force? Again, you'll only have 10 to 15 seconds to give that answer so we can get through everybody. And I'm just going to start at the top of my list, and we will go first. Again, first question, what is your biggest concern? How do you resolve it? Lieutenant Henderson.
Biggest concern is just the ignorance of the racism that's in the Navy currently, and of course in the nation. And like I said, I think that that ignorance is there because of the lack of education and lack of acknowledgement that's happened in the history of our Navy.
Okay, Lieutenant Commander Machado.
I think the biggest problem we have as a whole is there's very few minority leaders that are looked at as role models that's driven into our Navy culture, right? So that's number one. And then the way to resolve that is senior level leaders within the Navy need to make sure that when they choose to advocate on somebody, that the question of whether of their background is at least brought up.
10 to 15 seconds here. Lieutenant Spivey.
So overall, I think the key, and I know it's probably the bigger picture, 50,000 foot view, but my biggest concern and what I like to see is our culture and creating more empathetic leaders, because I think if we do that, we can take that and invest it across our country.
Chief Warrant Officer Williams, biggest concern, and how do you resolve it?
My biggest concern is the deflection that's going on. I think people will they are missing the core message, which is like Lieutenant Commander, I believe Walker said, is to address the human rights issue that's being discounted. And I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Unfortunately, we're losing your signal. I'm going to go on to the next one. Hopefully we can get you back on the next question. Senior Chief Stiles, biggest concern and how do you resolve it?
Two equal concerns, sexual harassment and assault and discrimination. I think they're both wrong and that we should take a more firm stance with NJP.
Senior Chief Carrillo. Senior, do we still have you? Okay, we'll go over to NC1 Leaks.
Hello. I'm sorry. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So for me, the problem where we can solve any of our issues in our Navy and in our society is accountability. We need to be accountable to ourselves and accountable to our fellow service members. We have the programs in place. We just need to enforce them. When the stats come out, focus on that group and focus on that command, remove that cancer so this won't happen again. Tomorrow's Navy will stand on the rights of history, knowing that the decisions of today were based on logic, ethics, and critical thinking, and not on the emotions and feelings of the domestic social politics of the moment.
Okay, let's go over to NC1 Leaks. NC1 still have you? Okay, let's go over to YN2 Mahoney.
Commander, so my biggest problem, I guess, would be the lack of empathy, and I would say the way to fix that would be to, as you know, one of the other service members has said, you know, enforce the policies in our programs that we have in place. You know, a lot of problems happen within the first year of a sailor being on board or service member, and enforcing the accountability of the resources that we already have and being empathetic towards people adjusting and adapting overall, no matter what part of the spectrum or where they're from or background, whatever that may be. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Walker.
Yes, sir. My biggest issue is, I would say, representation throughout, representation throughput from midshipman to flag officer. I think the way you resolve it is at the type commander level, being held responsible for how that is monitored. As an example, if the pool of 04 representation is roughly 1 to 10 African American to white male, then that 1 to 10 ratio carries forward to 05, 06, and 07. So while you might have a 25% selection rate, if that's 25% at the 05 or 06 level is 1 of 4, then we need to ask that the metrics, the follow-on metrics need to be matched back to why we lost the large pool to begin with, and not just celebrating the selection rate.
Okay, all right, going to second question here. This is, what is your #1 piece of advice to the task force? Again, I have to remind everybody, 10 to 15 seconds so we can get our leadership a little bit of time at the end here. Lieutenant Henderson.
#1 piece of advice is, again, to just maintain that acknowledgement and don't, sorry, I'm losing my thought. Yeah, but you can go ahead. I'll circle back.
Lieutenant Commander Machado.
Yeah, come back to me. I got to frame it.
All right. I don't know if we're going to have time to come back. Lieutenant Spivey.
Yes, sir. First thing would be, and it's easiest, education. Education on our nation's history, race in our Navy. I think that's an easy step at all levels. The second one would be recruiting. Send people from the fleet in flight suits to local communities and recruit that way.
Warrant Williams.
Acknowledge it and find a way to move forward. Like I think the best way to move forward is to acknowledge it and not be scared of it, not run away from it. Stop trying to turn it into a political thing, and just let it be a normal conversation that needs to be had. Because your sailors see that you're not having the conversation, and that makes them more dejected.
Lieutenant McMillan, your advice to the task force.
My advice, sir, would be, as mentioned before, continue to get comfortable in having those uncomfortable conversations and truly apply our instructions and NAV admins and equal forefront for each and everyone. Thanks, sir.
Senior Chief Stiles.
My number one piece of advice would be to continue what you're doing and listen. Conversations are pointless if we're not listening. Sailors want to be heard, and so they're going to keep talking. They just want to know that you're listening.
Senior Chief Carrillo.
Yes, team. Educate people past their color of their skin, and then have multiracial group videos of examples of everything we just talked about. We just talked about certain situations. Hey, at the deck plate, this happened to me. At the deck plate, this happened to me. If we can make that a nice video, like chart the course, and then use examples of accountability at that moment and how to execute these instructions that we already have in place. That's all I got.
Okay. NC1 Leaks, do we have you back? Okay, and just so we'll leave it enough time here for the panel, YN2 Mahoney. YN2, do we still have you?
Oh, sir, yes. And can you please reiterate what the last one, you said concern, right?
Your advice to the task force.
My advice to the task force would be to, just wholeheartedly try to come up with an altruistic approach that takes into account everybody and, has the utmost consideration of whatever is going to be taught, educated, opportunity, things that will emphasize humanity, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're human.
Okay, very good. All right, so that wraps up this portion of the discussion group. I'd like to toss it over to Force Master Chief Phillips, Ms. Roberts, and then over to the Admiral. Force?
Thank you, sir. Thanks to the team. We truly appreciate your feedback. In the words of Dr. King, he said, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So you speaking up today absolutely means the world to us. We want to hear it. To Lieutenant Walker's point, we have acknowledged that we have an issue. We've acknowledged that we have an issue in our Navy, and we're getting after it. So I appreciate your advice. I appreciate your experiences, and just know that we're going to take it on board and look to make a difference. Ms. Roberts?
I just want to echo those comments as well. Thank you for the great suggestions and ideas, and this is just the beginning of the conversation, and I look forward to many more as well.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Admiral Halsey, the floor is yours, sir.
So I'm going to, this is Captain Brown. I'm going to jump from
I'm sorry, sir.
So I'm the Deputy Director, but hey, I've learned so much in every day that I've been a part of this task force. And now it's our time to take this learning and translate that into making our Navy better. So I really do appreciate your stories. I'm a lot better man having heard them and a better officer. And I'm looking to now take this and translate this into action. I'm Halsey.
Yeah, so thanks. And first of all, thanks to all the participants today. Very thoughtful words, very powerful words, I think. I got an opportunity about 3 months ago, but go back to my college to accept the award on leadership. And I was speaking with the young people there and the leaders there in general. The topic was leadership. And a couple of things that really stood out. It was really, really good to hear those words echoed today from the standpoint of the empathy piece. So when I thought about leadership, 32 years of service now, leadership comes down, especially in the I&D realm, to empathy, compassion, development, and promise. That promise talks about a promise to see not just who a person is today, but what they can be and what they can do for our Navy team. So again, the empathy was really good to hear that piece today. As we go forward, we're taking a lot of notes. Look forward to doing this again over the course of our time here. But again, I can't say enough for your honesty and your comments. So thank you very much. And Dave, over to you.
Very good. Thank you, sir. So thank you, Admiral Halsey. Thank you, Admiral Select Brown. Thank you, Force Master Chief. Thank you, Ms. Roberts. And again, I'll re-echo, thank you very much to all of our participants who participated today. To all of our media that were listening on the line, again, as the Admiral said, this is the first of several of these listening sessions. And when we do the next one, we'll be sure to make you aware of that. So with that, I will conclude the listening session today. And again, a great thank you to everyone who supported. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
I think I'm taking mine.